Hello, and welcome to HoloTalk, the internet radio broadcast for lasers and holography, enjoyed by listeners throughout the world. I'm Frank DeFreitas, and I'll be your host for each installment, bringing you news, guests, and everything holographic. Now, please enjoy the latest show. Good morning, Carmen. It's Frank. How are you?
Hello, Frank. How are you?
Doing good. Are you ready to do our interview?
Sure.
Why don't we start off by having you tell the listeners a little bit about what it is you do there at the University of Pennsylvania?
Yeah, I work for the Radiation Oncology Department, and 10 years ago they brought photodynamic therapy, PDT, to UPenn. And so I've been working, I was here and then I left and then I came back a few years ago. So we've been doing cancer research and also clinical, treating patients with PDT needed,
So I'm assuming this is already past the trials of using whatever it is you use. How do the trials go?
There's basic research with cells and things like that. And then if that shows promise, then they go into another phase, or they may use animals. Or they go right to a clinical trial with patients. So really when we're talking about PDT, Frank, we're talking about site-specific treatments.
It's a dye or something that's absorbed by the cancer cells?
Well, the dye is in the laser.
I see.
It's a dye laser.
I see.
There is a chemical, it's a drug that has been developed that matches. It's a match with the wavelength of light and the specific drug.
Oh, I see.
So when they inject the drug or use it as a cream, depending on, again, where the cancer is, you put the drug on the skin or, in the system. And what happens is the cancer takes in more of the drug than normal tissue.
Mm-hmm.
So it holds on to it longer. So you wait a little bit, and that's all developed according to the drug. You wait a little bit, and then you can illuminate with the laser the site where the cancer is. When the light hits the drug, it creates what they call a photochemical reaction.
Okay.
Where it actually denatures the cell, the cancer cell, and creates singlet oxygen, and the oxygen kills the cancer. And because there's not a lot of drug left in the normal tissue gets spared. It's not destroyed. So it's very promising when you don't want to be disfigured by having it cut. A lot of cancer patients with skin cancers, for instance, benefit because they don't have all that surface cut off of their skin. Mm-hmm. A lot of times people get it and it comes back and it comes back. For instance, it's FDA approved for the esophagus, for Barrett's esophagus. Okay. And the alternative for some of these patients is to have an esophagectomy, which means their whole esophagus has to be removed. Now with PDT, it works on the lining of the esophagus, kills that cancerous condition, precancerous condition, and then normal tissue grows back.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's actually saving people from a terrible, terrible surgery. So it just really depends on what cancer you're talking about. We're doing studies for lung cancer. We have studies in the pipeline that we're going to start to do, but, I can't really talk about them because they haven't been approved, things like that. But there's a lot of work around the world in PDT. A lot of patients are being seen. Dermatology, skin, esophagus. If anybody's interested in this subject, go to OncoLink, OncoLink.com. Mm-hmm. And that's the UPenn cancer portal. if you will. It's a clearinghouse of all kinds of information. But if you go into the little search field and search PDT, it'll come up with all kinds of information.
Okay.
And it'll explain how it works, the laser, the drug, oxygen. Obviously, it doesn't work if there's no oxygen in the tissue.
Mm-hmm.
But, it's a nice little tutorial in there about it, too.
And what laser do you use to perform this?
We use it's a system, and it's the only one that was originally FDA approved, and that was from Laserscope. It's a twin crystal. It's a KTP YAG, and that laser pumps the dye module laser, which is a liquid dye, and that converts the energy to a 630 nanometer beam. So we we do PDT in red. It's all red work that we do here. Different wavelengths, but primarily red.
The wavelength is so close to helium neon. Is it a power issue as far as the reason why you wouldn't just use a Heaney?
Yeah, it is power. That, as well as we need to make sure that it's monochromatic.
Mm-hmm.
Heanies aren't always monochromatic. There's a couple different lines of red in there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, at 630, and that's the way that the drug company works. They use a specific wavelength. There's a study. There's some work that's promising at 690, 665. It's all over the place. But now that we know that the body is capable of allowing this with the drug and the drug introduced, and then working with a matching wavelength. Now that we know that, I guess a lot of people can go out and start to really, study and research what other wavelengths would be good,
What tolerance does this drug have with wavelengths? Is it specifically for 630 and 630 only?
The wavelength is usually a peak for that drug.
Okay.
There's usually a couple of peaks of absorption. There's a fluorescence peak. But what we work at is usually at 630 plus or minus 3 nanometers.
Okay.
And it usually is a tolerance of plus or minus 3.
Mm-hmm.
Because once you get away from what the drug specifies, then your efficacy, the efficiency of the cell kill goes down.
Mm-hmm.
And the point is to kill as much of it as we can. So obviously we would want to work at the peak.
Yeah.
What is the power of the beam that's being used?
From the laser, depending. We average, like in the esophagus, it's usually 1 watt.
Wow.
Yeah, 1 watt in a cylindrical diffuser. We use fiber optics to deliver all this light.
Mm-hmm.
Different types of fiber optics. One would be, like I said, this little diffuser that's 360 degrees. Because obviously, if you picture it in your mind, the fiber is going down a patient's throat into the esophagus, so there's a 360-degree field that the light has to hit.
I see.
If you're working on the skin, you don't need something like that. You just need a homogeneous spot size. And so we use a fiber that has a little lens on the end of it. And that makes a nice profile, a nice beam profile.
Yeah.
So, a lot of this is, what works, who's doing what. There's a lot of collaboration with other hospitals and medical centers. It's a small community still, but PDT is definitely growing around the world.
Yeah.
Getting back to the power, you would think that at 1 watt, that the beam would destroy just about any living tissue that it would come in contact with.
That's not the case, I assume.
No. But there are benchmarks, how much power per centimeter square we use, what is the total dosage. And that's what the studies determine, what is the maximum we can dose and what rate, and what is the minimum dose and what rate. And that's all we have real-time dosimetrists, physics people that come in, and they measure the light directly in real time, so we can tell that this part of the tissue is getting this much light. Let's go over to this part of the tissue. And I know it sounds very science fiction, but the studies are written to be very, very specific of what is allowed. You know, what are we looking for? What are we trying to accomplish?
Mm-hmm. Sounds very basic science, really, as the foundation.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And even though PDT's been around for about, I guess in really in marketing terms of how many people have been using it since the late 80s. But there's not a lot of people don't know about it because we just don't know enough about it yet. Lasers in medicine have been around for many, many years.
Mm-hmm.
But PDT is different because, you know, in laser talk, now that, photothermal is when you kill tissue with the beam.
Okay.
Where you actually create a burning or cauterization, you can carbonize. You know, you're actually using the beam to heat it up.
And this is not what we're talking about here, right?
Right. No, we're talking about a chemical reaction that happens.
Mm-hmm.
So, the light is higher power, like 1 watt. If I had a 1 watt, it's a power density issue. If it's in a very, very small spot, it's going to burn you.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's diffused and spread out, it's not going to hurt you.
Oh, and that's how the treatment is performed.
Exactly.
Oh, I see.
So
very interesting.
It's more diffused.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that power drops very rapidly.
Exactly.
Once. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's just another way that we're using light in the body. And that's why I got into this in the beginning, because I've always been a light freak.
Well, for the benefit of those folks who would ever want to consider making a jump over to working with lasers professionally, what was your path leading you to this?
Well, as a child, as a kid, I always was interested in medicine. But I was not ready. When I went to the photonics program at Camden County College in Blackwood, New Jersey, which is still there, and it's still quite an interesting program. They've added a fiber optic degree with it. But I went there, and when I was done, I realized that I just did not know enough to work in the medical field, because there's a lot of responsibility with that. And pressure sometimes, and you're dealing with patients and human beings. So I went into another path. I went into manufacturing, learned how to build them, and just got a comfort level. So years later, after doing different kinds of work with lasers, I ended up back and got into the medical field with a medical laser manufacturer.
I see.
And I started working for them, and for 10 years, actually. They were out of California. And that's the laser that was FDA approved for PDT. So that's how I got in to the University of Pennsylvania.
Well, they got the perfect person to work there.
Oh, thanks. Sweet. But by then, after all those years, I felt like, yes, now I'm really ready. I know the system, I understand what's going on, and I want to make a difference, so they offered me the job, and I took it.
Mm-hmm.
But as a kid I wasn't quite a kid out of college, but when I got out, it was like, what would I do? I mean, sometimes you have to fix this thing, the laser, you have to be on top of all the devices and all those things, and I wanted to go out and, do light shows. So I did.
What were some of the other things you did with lasers on your way to where you are now?
Well, one was the manufacturing job. That was in Long Island.
Mm-hmm.
They're still up there, Quantronics. After that, I went to work with an outfit that did laser light shows, literally in planetariums, and I did that for a little while.
Okay.
That was exciting. That was fun. And that really was the gate that told me that I can handle working on my own.
Okay.
Because when you're doing shows in planetariums with, real live lasers, real live projection systems, the sound systems, you're it. You have to be able to handle those things. You have to like it, too. And so I did that for a little while. And as you and I had spoken before, I just kind of got bored with it, actually. So that was my clue, that gee, maybe I'm ready to do something that I've really been interested in all my life.
I imagine there are a lot of people that would love to do laser light shows professionally. How long did it take you to become bored with it?
About, to be honest with you, about 4 or 5 months.
Oh, really?
Uh-huh. Because I wanted to be part of the programming.
I see.
I wanted to say, oh, I'm listening to a Beatles song, and here's what I would envision out on the screen.
The creative end.
Yeah. And I wasn't. I was the laserist. So they were programmed on 8-track tape, actually. It was a very cool thing, and I enjoyed it, don't get me wrong. It's just that after a while I realized I'd have to do this for years before I got into the studio to actually be the creative end of it. And do I want to travel around and do this and really just the same show all the time? You add your little flair, and I had a good time, and they were excellent shows that these people put together. But like I said, I always had the passion for medicine. And so that's where I had to just follow that until I got to where I was. So after that, I went to that medical laser company.
Okay.
And started working for them and traveling around. And I know for the laser propeller heads is what my family calls me because I'm into it. But for all those out there, there is work, but you do have to be willing to travel most of the time.
Yeah.
I would like to see more high-tech companies come into New Jersey to promote this. And they do, slowly. Your website's a great resource for people to find out what's going on.
Well, thank you.
You expressed an interest in getting involved with holography, didn't you?
Yes. Well, that's another passion. And that is just because it's one of the coolest things I've ever seen in my whole life. I don't even remember how I was a kid, I think. One of the first ones I ever saw. And I thought, my goodness, I want to be a part of that. So as soon as I found out that lasers, that I could study and be close to home, I jumped on it. And, there's a lot of hobbyists out there that if they wanted to get serious and really get into some more technical stuff, because the program teaches you all the interfacing, like you'll have computer courses, electronics, different things that, I'll be honest, I was one of 3 women in the whole class.
Okay.
And the 3 of us became, pretty good friends because we had to help each other understand what is he talking about. In electronics class, for instance, they would talk about working on the car and use analogies of, starters and things like that, and we would look at each other and say, what is he talking about? So it was, at that time, it was very unusual for women to be in this field. Now it's not unusual at all.
Yeah.
In fact, around the country I was called the laser lady.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, maybe your show will actually encourage other young women to look into this as well.
Oh, that would
if they're
be great.
listening out there.
That would be great. It's a wonderful opportunity, and there's so many different things you can do now. Even holography is non-destructive testing, imaging. I'd love to do. You and I have talked about it. Just different little projects and different do holograms of things that you don't normally see in that way.
Yeah.
You can do close-ups. You can do all sorts of things and turn people on. I love teaching kids about this too. At your demonstration the other week, the kids were just so turned on by it, and it's such a field. Light is a tool that is here to stay.
It's the future.
It is certainly the future.
I wish it was the present.
Well, that's the hard part. I know a lot of people that are interested in this, and it sounds great, but they don't really want to leave town. They don't want to work in other states so to those entrepreneurs out there, there's high-tech money for startup companies. There's got to be somewhere. Have an idea. What's your idea? Develop it. And New Jersey's got a whole lot of talent. New Jersey, Pennsylvania, the tri-state area. Most of the work is in California, Boston, Austin, Texas, Florida. So again, if you want to live in Florida, there's work down there. It just depends on what kind of life you want to lead. I knew some of the laserists who loved it. They lived like they were night owls because they did all their shows at midnight, 11 o'clock at night. But these guys were fabulous, and they were very creative. A lot of them were musicians, and and I could see the appeal, and it was a fun job. But like I said, I knew there was something else for me out there, and so that's why I'm here, and quite happily here, actually.
You're interested in the holographic functioning of the brain as well, aren't you?
Consciousness. One of the things that has been done here at Penn by the Department of Astronomy and Physics is that they're profiling the human body and all the optical properties. And just recently, there's a field called plasmonics, and that's optical properties of solid matter. We're talking about, like, hundreds of years from now, the transporters from Star Trek. You know how they transport you back and forth?
Yes.
Well, they have to know what the optical properties are to be able, of anything, right? I mean,
okay.
If you were going to get into the Star Trek analogy. Well, it's the old beam me up, Scotty.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that, sure.
Right. Well, there's also a book called The Science of Star Trek,
okay.
The Physics of Star Trek. And it tells you where, and Richard Feynman, whatever his name is, I forget who wrote it. It's a small little paperback, but he gives you an idea of where we are today, presently, to have certain things like warp drive, transporters, and things like that. So that's why I say to the listeners out there who are Trek fans, it's a very interesting book. But back to what I was saying about optical properties, there's so much being done in that field now, and one is to look at the brain and what's going on in the brain. It's not simply just electrical signals in a linear path. And more evidence points to more of a holographic, a three-dimensional way of knowing things, or way of creating memories. I don't know. I mean, I'm strictly an amateur when it comes to this, and please don't take me as, the authority. But it's so interesting that I would like to know more, and I would like to use what I know to maybe image things, to look at different ways of imaging, because you can do a hologram of a picture, right?
Yes.
So if you could do that of a picture, why couldn't you do it of an MRI or of an X-ray, and just start to play with holographic imaging and see what happens? But I know that they're doing things right now, for instance, not only just here, but they're using optical probes where they send in and put in a beam of light and look at the reflection and the profile of the beam when it comes back using spectroscopy to actually see functions.
Oh.
They can use optics now and light to follow blood flow, the dynamics of blood flow, all kinds of things. So, for stroke victims and brain damaged victims, there's all sorts of possibilities, because remember, if you can do something without cutting or destroying tissue, then that's what you want to do.
Yeah.
And light, being a tool, can do so many different things that ultimately you want to be able to profile somebody's whole body. Again, I go back to Star Trek when the tricorder, the Dr. Beverly, she would scan you and tell you where your problems are. Oh, you had a broken bone when you were 12 years old. Well, how did she do that? Well, obviously a combination of optics and something non-destructive. something that will go through skin and penetrate tissue and give information back.
I see.
And what does that? Light does that.
So you feel there's a great future in medical imaging, especially with lasers, optics, and such not?
Oh, yeah. And not only just imaging, but if you always consider light part of the electromagnetic spectrum and a tool. That tool, well, you can weld steel, you can cut out a tumor, you can do a show. I mean, you can do so many things with this tool. It's limited only by your imagination. And I'll tell you, that's exactly what the head of the laser program, when I was a student there, his name is Dr. Fred Sieber. That's exactly what he used to say to us all the time. You know, we'd say, well, can you do this? And what about that? And he'd say, it's whatever your imagination can tell you. And now, of course, you have to learn how to make that happen.
Yes, of course, yeah.
So, because the Internet is a great source of information. And there's a lot of people doing work that I'm talking about. You just go out and look for it. So you don't have to repeat it. Now we can communicate with each other and say, hey, you know what? Don't waste your time. I already did that. Mm-hmm. Now let's try that. And collaboration is easier now. And just all kinds of things. Even the fact that, you know, you need a little rig that you can put something in it, or, gee, where would I find that? Now you go out online and you can find almost anything you need.
Yeah.
You know, as far as lab work and materials. And the other thing, another great place to start if you're interested in this kind of work is in material science. Mm-hmm. Ceramics, look at that. 20 years ago, ceramics weren't nearly what they are now. Mm-hmm. Ceramics, optics. Well, they're talking about, when you were saying about holographic mind, a holographic memory system, I just read this somewhere, and excuse me if I get it a little bit wrong, but if you were to put, they're looking at crystals to store information.
Photorefractive crystals.
Right. You can put so much information on a crystal the size of your fingernail that you could probably get rid of, you know, half the mainframes in a building. Mm-hmm. Because they don't know why, but it's a quantum effect, and it works. So they're looking at that.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of different things. If people are interested in lasers, if they're interested in holography, look at non-destructive testing. That saves lives. They use it on jet engines. They use it on a lot of things, actually, nowadays, to make sure that there's no stress fractures, you know. My God, 10 years ago, if you had wanted to know, you know, where else can I use lasers, they'd look at you and go, well, there's, you know, scanners in the supermarket.
Yes, yes.
But now, you just have to look for it. Mm-hmm. And I think probably one of the most noble things people could do in this field is teach the young. Teach our kids.
Or at least get them excited enough about it to pursue it further. You can give them all the facts and figures in the world, and if you don't boost that interest and get them to have some sort of passion about something, it's just not going to take place.
That's right. These are things that are possible. Without being afraid of all the math, believe me, I am not a math wizard. I struggled, and I remember days when I'd throw my books across the room, and then I'd go pick them up, sit back down, and say, okay, you can do this, you know, but then again, it's just if you want to. I'm a firm believer that if you want something bad enough and you work hard, you'll get it.
Absolutely. I believe that as well.
Yeah. I mean, look, you've been in this field for 20 years?
Well, a little more than that.
Yeah, 23 years, something like that? Me
too.
Since 84.
Mm-hmm. 83 for me.
Yeah. So, in all those years, I was away from this work, away from working with lasers for 3 years. And I knew I had to go back to it. Mm-hmm. It was like one of those cosmic things. Even if I had to just, you know, like eventually, like I had said to you before, I want to do my own little holograms at home have my own basement studio kind of thing.
Easy enough to do.
Yeah. Well, now with your help, now that I've, your book is great. It's wonderful.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
I just took a sip of tea. I'm sorry I wasn't able to respond right away.
Mm-hmm. But that's shown me that even if I got away from this work for a little while, I could still be involved with light.
Yes.
And it's fun to play with sunlight. You can use different optics at your window and light up a part of your room that doesn't get much sunlight. Use a Fresnel lens and,
Mm-hmm.
just play with it. I don't know when, but I'm definitely going to sign up for one of your workshops.
Great. Love to have you.
Come up and hang out.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe swap some technology and some skills.
We'll get you so that you can go back to your house and start to get your own studio set up.
Well, and I like to do stained glass, too.
Mm-hmm.
So incorporating the holographic plate into stained glass
yes.
has always been something I wanted to try. So I'm getting close.
Okay.
Getting close to it.
Well, Carmen, we're coming close to the end of our time. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you would like to add to the program?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I definitely enjoyed talking about it. And if this has enlightened anyone or given anybody an idea to get into this work, more power to you. Anytime, if anybody has any questions, if I can't answer, I usually can help them find the answer.
That's wonderful.
And if anybody has anybody in their family or themselves, if they're cancer patients, I strongly recommend checking out that OncoLink website.
Okay.
That's a wealth of information, too.
All right.
Well, thank you, Frank.
Thank you, Carmen, for taking the time to come on the show. And I'm sure the listeners enjoyed what you had to say and found it fascinating. Thank you again.
Thanks. My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.